Hello friends, welcome to my YouTube channel. I am Nanoba Suryavanshi, the author of DCC Spoken English. Dear friends, today I am here to tell you how to become fluent in English. I am going to tell you the method to become fluent in English. Dear friends, there are so many people, they are struggling to learn English. But what is the reason behind it? Why they are struggling to learn English? There are so many people, they say they are able to understand English, they can read English, but their problem is that they cannot speak in English. So what is the reason behind it, or what are the solutions on this problem, or how we can become fluent in English? So there are so many ways which will help us to improve our English communication skill, or which will help us to improve our English fluency. But I think the one way, I'm going to tell you the one way which will help us to improve our English fluency, and that is reading books. Dear friends, we should read books because books will help us to build up our vocabulary, and we will get content from the books. And definitely books, reading books can help us to become fluent in English. And nowadays I am also reading books for improving my English. Now I would like to tell you, since last 8 days I am reading a book, and this book is written by Sudha Murthy. The name of the book is How I Taught My Grandmother to Read. How I Taught My Grandmother to Read. And this book is in the form of stories. And this is a very simple book. This is very simple book. The language of this book is very simple, and it is in the form of stories. And we like to read stories, but they are helping us to improve our English. So now I would like to tell you the first story from that book. In that book there are some stories, and the first story is How I Taught My Grandmother to Read. And Sudha Murthy says in the beginning of the story that Sudha Murthy was 12 years old, and she was staying with her grandparents in Karnataka. She was staying in a village in South Karnataka, and she says that the village was away from city, and the transportation system was not good at that time. And the bus used to come to that city, and the bus used to bring newspapers, magazines, or magazines and newspapers were coming by that bus to that village. And morning bus used to come at afternoon. So the newspaper which we have to read in the morning, that newspaper was getting us to read at afternoon. And the magazine, weekly magazine, that today's magazine was coming tomorrow, means today's magazine was coming one day late. So Sudha Murthy says that at that time there was one Bengali writer, her name was Triveni, and she was very famous writer at that time. And she had written one book. The name of that book was Kashi Yatri. And that book Kashi Yatri had a story that there was one old woman, and that old woman, she was collecting money for going to Kashi, because in Kashi, Varanasi, there is one god. And when people go and worship that god, I think god Vishweshwara, and when people go and worship that god, then we get punya. So that woman was collecting money. But in that book, there is one girl, and that girl is an orphan girl. And what happens with that girl? That girl falls in love with a boy, and she wanted to marry with that boy, but she had no money. She had no money for her marriage. And when this old woman comes to know about that orphan girl, then this old woman decides to give all that money to that orphan girl for her marriage. She decided to help that orphan girl for her marriage, and she thought that the marriage of this orphan girl is more important than worshipping God at Kashi. And she gave all the money to that orphan girl for her marriage, and she helped that girl to marry. But what happened? Sudha Murthy had a grandmother, and that story was very famous, Kashi Yatri, and it was divided in episodes. And every week, one episode was coming in newspaper, in the magazine, and Sudha Murthy used to read that newspaper to her grandmother, and grandmother was listening the story of Kashi Yatri from that newspaper, and it was the dream of Sudhamurti's grandmother also to go to Kashi like that old woman in the story. So Sudhamurti was explaining all the story to her grandmother. But one day what happened? Sudhamurti went to a marriage with her cousin, and she had told that she will stay there for 2 days, but she stayed there for 1 week. And after 1 week, Sudhamurti came back. And when Sudhamurti came back and she met her grandmother, at that time there were tears in the eyes of her grandmother. And Sudhamurti was surprised. Sudhamurti was shocked. Why my grandmother is crying? What is the reason? Because her grandmother was very tough. There were no tears in her eyes at very difficult time also. And then why today my grandmother is crying? And then Sudhamurti asked her grandmother, Awa, what is the reason? Why are you crying? Why there are tears in your eyes? But grandmother did not tell her anything. And at night, Sudhamurti was sleeping in the porch, in the yard, in open sky. And grandmother came near Sudhamurti, and grandmother loved Sudhamurti very much, and Sudhamurti also loved her grandmother very much. Now grandmother said to Sudha, when I was a small child, when I was a young child, at that time she lost her mother, and she said her father was very busy man, and so he got married once again. And grandmother said that at young age she also got married, and after marriage, yeah, she had children, she had grandchildren, and she was busy in taking care of grandchildren, she was busy in cooking for her family. And she said when she was small, at that time she could not go to school, because at that time they said that education is not for girls, or education for girls is not important, we should not give education to girls. And she said so that she could not go to school. But Sudhamurti was thinking, I am a 12 years old, and my grandmother is 62 years old, and why my grandmother is telling all these things to me? But after that, grandmother said that she had not gone to school, so she didn't know reading. And she said, you went to marriage and you did not come back for 8 days. So she missed the story of Kashi Yatri, and after listening the story from Sudhamurti, she used to go village temple, and some old women get together there, and Sudhamurti's grandmother was explaining them that story. And she said, now I wanted to learn to read, and you have to teach me to read. And then Sudhamurti said, okay, I will teach you to read. And from that day onwards, Sudhamurti started to teach her grandmother, and grandmother also was learning it from her heart, or she was working very hard to learn to read. and she had a target to learn to read. And there was one festival, and she said, before that festival I will become a good reader. And Sudhamurti also taught, and her grandmother became a good reader. And after completing her education of reading, Sudhamurti bought that book Kashiyatri, and she gave that book to her grandmother to read. And on that day, Sudhamurti says her grandmother touched her feet, touched her to the feet of Sudha. And Sudhamurti said, "Grandmother, what you are doing? Avva, what you are doing?" And she said, "You are my teacher, and I should show respect to my teacher. I should I should respect my teacher." And Sudhamurti said, "I also touched my grandmother's feet, and in this way, I taught my 62 years grandmother to read." And dear friends, this book is very interesting. If you want to improve your English, then you also should read this book. Dear friends, if you like this video, please like it, share it, comment on it. And if you have not subscribed my channel, then don't forget to subscribe it. Thanks a lot.